For Session Update, I'm Shannon Loehrke. Physician-assisted death, also known as the Minnesota Compassionate Care Act of 2015, is starting a conversation about the law, suffering, and personal choice in Minnesota. The state of Oregon's Death with Dignity Act went into effect in 1997, and 5 other states have since passed laws allowing for aid in dying when facing a terminal diagnosis. The Senate Committee on Health, Human Services, and Housing will be taking up this matter soon. I had a chance to talk with both Senator Benson, a Republican from Ham Lake, and DFL Senator Chris Eaton of Brooklyn Center about this issue. We'll begin with Senator Benson. Welcome, Senator Benson.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
So this is a very emotional issue for everyone, the individual with the diagnosis and also the family members. Does an individual, in your view, have the right to make this choice for aid in dying?
I wouldn't say for aid in dying, because then you're asking someone outside of yourself to assist you in ending your life. Mm-hmm. But I will say, as people approach the end of their life, simply not wanting to go on is a very common feeling. Mm-hmm. But we do cross a line when we say, I need you to help me make the decision, and I need you to help me to die. My own grandmother, at the end of her life, stopped eating and just said, I'm ready to go. But it wasn't, she didn't expect anybody else to contribute mm-hmm. to expediting her death. She just took it upon herself. She stopped eating and wanted to be done. She was ready to go. Mm-hmm. And as a family, we went through that with her, and encouraged her to, please, do you want something to eat? Would mm-hmm. you like something mm-hmm. to drink? And she was very clear, no, she didn't want to. And it wasn't easy, mm-hmm. but we went through it together. Mm-hmm. And so I think people just come to a point in their life when they're ready to move to the next, in my opinion, to move through that veil. Mm-hmm. It's when we ask someone else to overtly engage in expediting death that we cross a line. And for me, when we as a policy in the state of Minnesota say that human life has lost its value and we will not defend it anymore, and to write down in statute and say it is the position of the state of Minnesota that there will be human lives we won't defend, mm-hmm. I think crosses a line.
So I think one of the things that makes this difficult for people is the fact that it's a terminal diagnosis. And we do have medical technology now that can extend life way beyond what it used to be. In preparing for this, I read several articles where people said, 20 years ago, I would pass in a very short period of time, but now with the medical technology, with the types of interventions that can happen, life is extended much beyond, and sometimes I think people don't want to have to suffer that long. Do you think they should be allowed, if they're of good, sound mind, to make the decision to end their own life?
You already have the right to not have extended medical intervention. If you're diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, no one can force you to take chemo. Mm-hmm. No one can force you to receive treatment for heart disease. No one can force you to be put on a ventilator. You can already make the choice to not have those extraordinary treatments. Mm-hmm. You're simply saying to a doctor, don't help me. I'm going to handle this my own way. Mm-hmm. You're saying to our medical profession, it's okay. You offered, and I don't want you to help me through this, or I only want you to help me in these limited ways. But when you ask them to cross that line from not just withholding life-extending treatments, but when you cross the line to, I'm overtly going to expedite your death, we're crossing from merely, when you talk about all the life-extending options, mm-hmm. we can at any point say, I'm not going to take those options. Mm-hmm. We have that right as individuals. The medical profession shouldn't force on us things that we, of sound mind, mm-hmm. don't want to engage in. But to have the medical profession expedite death is a line that I think, challenges the medical profession's healing, their call to healing.
Right.
And puts those professionals in a position of discerning if a person is of sound mind, discerning, what will the quality of their life be, instead of just keeping this line that says you as an individual can choose how you are cared for, but you shouldn't ask someone else to expedite your death.
Right, which, one of the other challenging aspects of this is then doctors who take the Hippocratic Oath to do no harm then are being asked to harm by ending someone's life. And I know that's one of the controversial issues here. Do you want to speak a little bit more about that?
Well, and fundamentally, we hope that when we go into a doctor, that they are there to help us be the best us we can be. There are increasing wellness movements. Instead of doing extended treatments, instead of putting you on a drug, let's change the way you eat. And so we're telling one part of the medical profession, please empower individuals and help them live without protracted medical intervention. But then when we get to the end of life, we say, oh no, doctors, you should engage in expediting death. And so we send so many contradictory messages to our medical profession.
So the last thing I want to talk about is just the inequality of the choice. There are 5 states where people can go, and there was a woman in California who, before she moved to Oregon, she had enough money to do so. She recorded a statement for the California legislature where she said, I'm dying and I would like the choice to end my life, and I'm also financially able to move to Oregon and establish residency and have that choice. What about people who don't have the funds or the time to make that choice? So it's setting up sort of an inequality. Can you speak on that a little bit?
What about the people who don't have the funds for life-saving treatment and feel pressured to end their life to protect their family from financial loss? If we want to talk finances, I think we are going far afield of the core principles that this legislation represents. But there will be tremendous pressure on families that don't have money, that are facing bankruptcy.
Do you think that pressure would be coming from the medical establishment or from insurance companies? I mean, is that something you're concerned about?
I think that as an individual looking at their family and the bills that are piling up, I think that individual might feel pressure. Even if it didn't come from an insurance company or didn't come from a doctor or didn't come from outside their family, that individual themselves. If we want to talk about financial issues, we can go down that path, but I don't think that is at the core of what this legislation means for Minnesota.
Senator Benson, thank you so much for stopping by, and I'm sure there's more to come on this very emotional and challenging topic.
It is very difficult and needs to be handled in a sensitive way, and I thank you for doing that today.
You've been watching an interview with Senator Michelle Benson about physician-assisted suicide. I also had the opportunity to speak with Senator Eaton, the chief author of the Minnesota Compassionate Care Act of 2015, which will come before the Committee on Health, Human Services, and Housing this session. Here's that interview. Welcome, Senator Eaton.
Thank you.
So you are the lead author on the Compassionate Care Act. What brought this issue to your attention?
It started, well, I'm a registered nurse, and I've cared for a lot of people who are in very poor health. And as a nurse in any family, you get called in whenever anybody's in serious health problems. So I've observed a number of people in their last days of life. Some of them went very peacefully, but there were a couple that were pretty rough that really had an impact on me. And then the story of Brittany Maynard came up in the news.
Yes, I watched her video.
Okay.
It was very moving.
Yes. And I went, oh, that's what we need here. And that was my motivation.
So what's happening in California, where California will have aid in dying starting in June, I believe, of this year. So that was the impetus. There have been some informational hearings on this topic. What has surprised you the most? What have you learned from those hearings?
I would say that, for one thing, it's amazing how collegial our people in Minnesota are. Even when they disagreed about very emotional, serious issues, they were very polite to each other. It was very nice to see. Sometimes we don't see that in the Senate.
Right, right. Well, and especially with an issue that's as challenging as this, it's very emotional and loaded terms are getting thrown around. And I want to ask you about this because sometimes people refer to this as physician-assisted suicide rather than physician-assisted death or aid in dying. Isn't it really suicide?
No. I don't even think of it as suicide. To me, this is no different than when somebody's at the end of life and you stop life support, or they decide to stop eating or drinking, or they refuse any further care or treatment. It's just another way of ending the agony of the body's breaking down when you're in the disease process. And I just see it as somebody saying, I just as soon skip that last part because it's going to be extremely unpleasant. And some of it's, the family gets traumatized, and right now what most people do is, quite frankly, is pick up a gun. And it's very traumatizing for them and their families.
That would be.
It's like 60% of gun deaths are suicides, and a majority of them have to do with end of life or health.
So I want to move to doctors a little bit. Doctors take an oath to do no harm, and I imagine that some doctors would feel that to even prescribe medication for someone to take would be challenging that oath. Will doctors have a choice? What can you say to doctors that are concerned about that?
Well, I certainly understand that sentiment. I mean, and I've had doctors say that, but I've also had other doctors who work a lot in the end-of-life care who've said that they think there's a place for this. So my bill allows anybody to opt out. It doesn't require anybody to do this if they don't want to, whether you're a nurse or a doctor, and in fact, whole medical systems can say, I don't want anybody in our, like a LINA or Health Partners or one of the, they can say nobody in our system can participate in this. So this is totally voluntary.
So another concern that people have is that individuals may feel forced to make this choice due to financial pressures. End of life care can get very, very expensive, and that some people might not want to make this choice but might do it, say, for the sake of their family or not just, how do you feel about that? What can you say about that?
Well, that would be very sad. Under the Affordable Care Act and with our MNsure on top of it, I would think that most people in Minnesota would have adequate medical care for whatever treatments they want. The financial thing was, some people end up having to go into a facility where they start losing assets, and I can see that part being a concern, but that would actually argue for the opposite, I would think. But I'm not. I think by the time they've seen 2 doctors and had to do this, there's a 15-day waiting period in between the 2 written requests, and there's evaluation by 2 separate physicians. I think by the time you've gone through that, somebody's going to figure out if you're not really into it. I mean, this is not an easy thing to do.
No, it's not. It's a difficult decision both for the individual and also for their family members.
But it's also if you're not feeling well, this is a lot of steps to go through. This is really, this is not something you can say, well, I'm going to go down the street and take care of this.
Right.
This takes a lot of planning and a lot of paperwork, and then most people who do get the prescription, they don't fill it till they're starting to feel pretty awful, and they don't use it usually till 6 months or later. I mean, people want to live. They fight to live as long as they can, and as long as it's not as miserable to live as it is to not be here, they want to go on. I mean, it's. I think the misconception that a lot of people get is because you only need the diagnosis of 6 months, terminal illness, is that they would go get the medication and take it right away, and then what if the diagnosis is wrong and all that? Well, people don't do that. They hang on to the medication until they feel that you know, this is what I need to do. I can't take this anymore. The agony is too much.
So what will the cause of death read on a death certificate for someone who uses this?
Whatever their underlying disease process is. If they have cancer, ALS, whatever it is.
Is there anything else you'd like citizens to know about this legislation, since it will come before the committee very soon?
I think that it's, like I said, it's just another medical procedure, and instead of taking off the